So this is key area 2 of Unit 2 of National 5, and it's called Control and Communication. It's a massive one, so what we've divided it into is, well, 5 videos, but there are 2 main sections to it. So first main section is about nervous control. The second main section is about hormonal control and how hormones control stuff. So for this first 2 videos, I think, we're going to be looking at nervous control and the features of it.
Okay, so here's a course specification on this stuff. Nervous control, there isn't too much to know about it. And actually the first part of that, which is the huge bit, there's actually less in that part. There's more in the second part for the structure and the function of the reflex arc. But the brain stuff, it's quite nice, it's much shorter. It tends to be the hormonal control that people find more confusing.
So if we have a look at what the whole of the nervous system is in sort of basic terms, is we'll be looking at what is the nervous system, the structure and function of the brain, the types of neurons, how signals are sent through the neurons, and then the reflex arc. And this video is dealing just with the brain parts, so the nervous system and the structure and function of the brain. So that's what we're going to be looking at. We're going to be looking at the structure of the brain and the different functions of those structures.
Okay, so again, by the end of this video, you should be able to name the different parts of the central nervous system, kind of the main parts of that. You should be able to name the 3 main parts of the brain and describe appropriately what they do, and give examples of things that the three structures of the brain are responsible for controlling.
And that last one is more like your applying knowledge type exam question. So rather than here's a picture of the brain, name part X, it would say, in what part would you expect to see somebody riding a bike? Something like that. Okay, so let's look at the nervous system to start off with. There you go.
So in terms of the nervous system, there's kind of 2 main parts that you need to know. You need to know the central nervous system, which is made up of the brain and the spinal cord itself. So kind of literally the main brain and the kind of line right down the middle that runs down your spinal column. That's your central nervous system. And then all the other bits coming off of it, so basically every other nerve coming off of that, is just known as other nerves, which is just a kind of generalized name for it. So 2 main parts, central nervous system, other nerves. You might get asked to name the 2 parts of the nervous system, in which that would be your answer, or you might get asked to name the parts of the central nervous system, which would then be your brain and your spinal cord. So make sure you know, is it asking for the parts of the nervous system, or is it asking for the parts of the central nervous system? And these things are obviously the things that are kind of responsible for your response to everything. Like as your body, anything that you do is controlled by your nervous system and these electrical signals going through it saying, do this thing, basically. But we'll look more on what they do soon.
Okay, so again to stress, it's important that you know the central nervous system is the brain and the spinal cord. Common exam questions, multiple choice questions, but with sentence answer ones are name the parts of the central nervous system. Okay, the job of the brain to process sensory information and generate movement signals. The point of the spinal cord is basically one giant information superhighway running signals from the rest of the body up to the brain, and vice versa.
In terms of the structure of the brain, there are 3 main parts that you need to know. You need to know the huge big bit at the top, which is known as the cerebrum. You've got to know the little bit, some quite often looks like a bit of cauliflower in a picture, but it's in the bottom right here, the kind of darker pink, which is the cerebellum. And then you've got the final bit, which is the medulla, which is basically the brain stem, but you need to call it the medulla now. So cerebrum at the top, cerebellum below it, and then the medulla is the kind of central bit at the bottom. That's the bit that would be going towards the top of your spine. Is the kind of easiest way to think about it.
Okay, so if we have a look at the cerebrum, there is, this is just an alternative diagram. You need to get used to seeing the brain in both directions, so basically with the front facing left and the front facing right. On this particular diagram, the front of your head is on the right side of the video of the picture, okay? So the cerebellum, the other area, is at the back. So you need to be able to identify that's the front, that's the back, and the cerebrum is the top bit up the top that kind of looks like, I don't know, clouds, smushy stuff. It's the bit at the top.
The bit that you think of as the brain.
Yes, the thing that's most typically brain looking like.
Yeah. You've also got to remember that there are other bits sometimes that will be labelled, like if you look in textbooks and other websites, it might label things like the hypothalamus and pituitary gland. They don't matter.
Ignore them.
You don't need to know them, totally ignore them. You only need to know these 3. So in terms of the cerebrum, so the bit that really is the brain bit at the top, this is where basically your thoughts and your personality comes from. It's the big bit. It's responsible for what really makes you you, and things like memory. So if you were trying to study for a test and recalling facts, that's really your cerebrum that will be firing there. So everything that's kind of conscious thoughts, are to do with your cerebrum.
Yeah, it's a part of the brain that we are super interested in because we understand a bit about what it does, but not anything like the amount of what it does.
And a lot of your brain problems, like people with personality disorders and things, it's because something has gone wrong in the cerebrum, and it's really, really interesting to find out what has gone wrong and why.
Right, so the medulla is next. So the medulla is it's sometimes known as the brain stem, because the idea is it's the bit that links off onto the spinal cord. So that area there is known as the medulla. It's kind of a little bit on the pons, but we're going to ignore that. So we're going to say anything in that kind of zone leading down, that is the medulla.
Okay. The medulla is responsible for doing all things that you have no conscious control over. So anything that is unconscious that you do without thinking. The main examples of this being your breathing and your heart rate. You don't think about it. You don't think about breathing, or you don't really usually. You can, but you don't. And your heart rate, you don't think, heart, go on, beat right now. It just beats. It's things that you have no conscious control over, are things that your medulla is responsible for. But they're the go-to too. Breathing, heart rate. Things like digestion also is one of them, but really breathing and heart rate are the two you need to know. Anything else, not as important.
And I know you can artificially breathe more or breathe less, but you cannot control your need to breathe more or breathe less. So it's not like you can do a massive run and instantly think, I have stopped running, I will breathe at a normal rate. You are forced to breathe heavily until your medulla basically says you don't need to anymore. So cerebellum is I love these names. They're just brilliant. The fact that they're all almost the same. The cerebellum is this area at the back that kind of looks, if it's cut open, it looks like a leaf kind of pattern inside of it. Sometimes it will not be cut open like the previous slide versions. So that area there is the cerebellum. Now it's tucked away at the back of your skull. Okay.
Kind of a bump on the back of your skull about where it is.
And again, remember this idea, you need to be able to identify what's the front and what's the back from the diagrams, and then you can work out, well, there's the cerebellum, there's the medulla, there's the cerebrum.
Okay, the cerebellum, that is to do with balance and coordination. I like to remember it because it's the one with the letter L in it out of cerebrum and cerebellum, so it's the one to do with balance, because balance is an L. It works for some people, it doesn't work for a lot of people the way that that works, but cerebellum is to do with balance and coordination. So again, if you're talking about something like if you are riding a horse or riding a bike or doing something that requires balance and coordination, like any
riding
kind of
a
sport,
hoverboard.
or riding, that's not a hoverboard.
I'm sure they're called hoverboards.
No.
I think they are.
I don't know.
I'm sure they're called
doesn't
hoverboards.
matter. What matters is that the cerebellum controls balance and coordination, and it's in, again, if you feel the back of your head, there is like an obvious lump where it is very protected. There's a big thick part of your skull, because if you lose the ability of your cerebellum, you're not going anywhere.
If you think about toddlers and people generally, when you smack your head, you tend to smack the front of your head. It would be really damaging if you had your cerebellum at the front of your head, because every time you smack your head, likelihood is you're going to fall over because you'll lose your balance and coordination, and that then causes more injury. So it makes sense that it's tucked away at a protected area at the back. Okay, so just to summarize sort of descriptions, it'd be a good idea to have this in your jotter, in your notes, or that sort of thing. So you've got the cerebrum is responsible for conscious thoughts, reasoning, memory, and emotions. And an example of that use is remembering the answers during an exam.
Your cerebellum controls the balance and coordination and movement of the body. An example of time this might be used more would be riding a bike. But what is important to note is it doesn't mean that the other bits are not being used. When it's like riding a bike, you still use your cerebrum. Just the idea is your cerebellum is the one we'd most associate with it because of the balance and coordination. So you are using all of these at all times. It's not like whenever you ride a bike, you forget to breathe.
Yeah.
It's very much, they all work, but this one is used more.
And the medulla, it controls unconscious actions, particularly the one we want to focus on is heart rate and breathing rate, which we're kind of hiding with our picture here. But yeah, it's heart rate and breathing rate. Okay, this slide here, again, is just summarizing everything we've covered. The only thing that's different from the last slide is the central nervous system is the most important bit. It's made up of the brain and spinal cord. So that's the key part there.
Okay, so now that you've seen that video, hopefully you should be able to name the main parts of the central nervous system, which are
brain and spinal cord.
You should be able to state the three main parts of the brain.
Cerebrum, cerebellum, and medulla.
You should be able to describe the functions of the three main parts of the brain.
Really? Okay, right. Medulla, breathing, heart rate. Cerebellum, balance and coordination. Cerebrum, thinky stuff.
And please don't say thinky stuff in your exam. Please use actual words. And you should be able to give 3 examples of the 3 structures of the brain.
I don't know. Remembering answers for a test would be the cerebrum. Not falling over when walking a tightrope would be cerebellum, and yeah, breathing and heart rate again. We don't have individual things that we're doing for the medulla. Okay, so that is section 1. Section 2 of the nervous system, we're going to start looking at the 3 types of nerves.